Oh, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, whether you're in person or in the room with us. I know we have a lot of interesting topics to cover today, and I'm grateful that DRS is here, and I want to thank them for their work on this report. And I look forward to a really fruitful conversation about what we can do to improve revenue and help the taxpayer. So with that, I will hand the baton over to my co-chair is on his way. So that thus concludes the remarks from the chairs. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate being here. Folks, my name is Mark Boughton. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue Services, right, Representative Piscopo? I'm very sleuthy and stealthy. So I'm usually over at 450 Columbus, which is where our home office is. With me today is a couple of members of our team. I just thought I'd quickly introduce them. John Bielos, our Deputy Commissioner, also in charge of auditing. Lou Bakari is our Chief Legal Counsel behind me. Mike Gallagher, who had a lot of work and really frankly wrote this report, is sitting here in the back from our revenue and auditing and forecasting unit. Sorry, our analytics unit. And in addition to that, Tiffany Teely is over here and she's does all of our comms. So we appreciate your all being here today. Folks, we were charged by the General Assembly to develop something called the Tax Gap Report. We've done that and we sent it out to you and we're publicly rolling it out today. Before we kind of delve into this, I'll be real quick about this, but there's just a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. One is that we are really not any different than any other state. So when you see these numbers, initially look, it makes me freak out when I see them. So I can understand why you would be concerned about them. But we're pretty much, if you benchmark us, we're the rest of the state is and what the national numbers are as well. Now, that doesn't mean we should collect this. It just means that can we do better? Sure. But, you know, other folks out there are struggling with some of the very same issues that we are. The agency is always committed to employing new strategies, but a lot of those we have to take direction from you. Some of them have to be done statutorily. We can't just go out and do some of the things that we would like to do, and I'll certainly be happy to share those with you today. But we always are willing to adapt new methods, and John and I attend. I used to not go to a lot of these conferences thinking that they were just not a waste of taxpayer money, but sort of like a, you know, retreat somewhere. And now I actually go because I find them fascinating. And I meet on a quarterly basis with all of the New England folks that do the same job that I do, as well as some of the folks in the Mid-Atlantic states. So we see new strategies. We, you know, the best ones are the ones that we can borrow from other states. We implement them when we can. We also, as you know, have gone through a large evolution with our CTAX system. This report, I probably would say to you, is about tax fairness in a way too. I mean, everybody on the dais and everybody in our state and every one of our taxpayers and our governor want folks to pay their fair share. You know, Governor Lamont and I talk often, and he often says that we don't need more taxes, we need more taxpayers. And I think he's right to an extent. We really do. And so this really strikes at the heart of that in many, many ways, because it is about fairness, but it's also about being able to collect what is rightfully due, not us, not state government, but to the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. So with that, we're going to rotate over to the first couple of slides. It's a brief deck. It's not too long. Don't worry. I get it. You guys get handed these kind of presentations all the time, and it's a lot. Okay. So we were charged to look at what we call the tax gap. That's a difference between the total amount of dollars that are owed, the gross amount of dollars that are owed, and then obviously what we actually collect. So we can call that the net. Later on, we'll get into what the next net tax gap is. I'm just going to pull this up here so I can see a little bit better. We spent about 6 months pulling this together, and this is just the first one, just like we did the other tax study for you, and we'll continue to work on this, and it's a work in progress. We sometimes want to add things to it, sometimes want to take things out, and of course, we'll take direction from you. The tax gap, as I mentioned, is the difference between the total state taxes that are owed and under full compliance and all the state laws that we have out there. So when you put all that together, this is what's owed. We operate, and we've had this discussion before, typically when we talked about the highway use fee, we operate on what's called voluntary compliance. It's really up to people to decide that they want to pay their taxes, right? So in that system, the highway use fee operates the same way. The tax gap exists because some individuals and businesses underreport, underpay, or fail to file their taxes. And we've actually broken that down in a pie chart for you that's pretty good. And our compliance is driven by enforcement activities. They could be audits, they could be collection practices, field agents that make visits to businesses, for example, communications. People actually call into our call center in an effort to be compliant. We kind of walk them through how to do things. So we use a lot of different methods and methodologies. We also have a series of algorithms that trigger various audit scenarios that we think an area may be right for us auditing, or a particular return. We have found, so what we did is we measured 2022. So this is just the tax gap for 1 year. It's not the total tax gap of all years, but it's probably a pretty good indication of what's owed. And we found that that runs about $3.7 billion. So that gross tax gap before we do any enforcement activities is about 3.7 billion with a B. After we get done doing our enforcement activities, and sometimes they take multiple years to go back and collect because there may be disputes and things like that, we clear about 800 million, 700 million, somewhere in that range that we collect through our enforcement activities. The largest component of where people don't pay their fair share, if you will, is underreporting. That's about 80% of the tax gap is created by underreporting. Underpayment is about 14%, and people who just don't file at all, it's about 6.5%. So it's actually kind of a small amount of number. People thought it's a much bigger number. It's not. Underreporting, people that don't report what they actually make, is really where those numbers can be found. So if you take a look at, we have one slide up in here. As we mentioned, it's consistent with the IRS tax gap, very similar numbers on a percentage basis that you'll see. When we go to the pie chart, though, which is I find interesting for Connecticut, you'll see that for underpayments, there's a net underrepayment for about $101 million. That's for the roughly $3.7 billion. That comes from things like the healthcare provider fees, which is the bane of my existence, sales and use tax, corporation business, pass-through entity, excise taxes. Those are all subject to some type of net underpayment to the tune of about $101 million. Next. Non-filing. Non-filing, the net non-filing gap is $73 million. Again, folks that should pay sales and use but don't is about 50%. I think it's a theme you'll see throughout here. Health care provider, again, the bane of my existence, is about 10%. Excise, real estate, all of these are ones that people just didn't file. And individual income tax is actually pretty low. It's about 30%. I thought it was always going to be a lot higher, but it's pretty low. Underreporting. Underreporting refers to the discrepancy between what taxpayers owe and what they report on their tax returns. It's deliberate tax evasion. Sometimes it could be not deliberate. It could be just inaccurate reporting or a mistake. That happens, and we try to work with those folks when that does happen, as long as we pick it up or they point it out to us. Believe it or not, people call us and say, I made a mistake. I think I owe you more money. And we're happy to walk through the process to amend their return. It is the largest contributor of the overall tax gap. It's about $2.94 billion. The net after enforcement activities is about $2.83 billion. And a lot of this is the underground economy. Think about your barber. Think about the housekeeper. Think about the landscaper, that all operate off of the cash business, and obviously they don't report their cash. It's a challenge for us because it's irregular. It's hard to track. You don't really necessarily know. It also could be in the form of tips that a waiter or a service person might take, or they're working off the books and getting tips at the same time. They're a double whammy for the tax gap. Usually they're transactions that are taking place outside of the formal system that's put in place. Now, I'm going to just interject here. Some folks have mentioned to me over the years, POS programs, point of sale programs, where it's automatically embedded in the sales tax software. When you run a credit card through, it automatically, we get our money. I can tell you that the big folks, the Home Depots of the world, the big retailers, they're already doing that stuff. That's not where you see us losing this money. Where we see losing this money are the small corner variety store, where they may be selling something off the shelf or selling it under the table or not. We see this, again, in a lot of manual labor kind of works, masons and landscapers, and I'm not in any way casting dispersions on those folks. They work very hard, but a lot of them don't always report their income. So it's something to be in. But generally speaking, the large, highly organized businesses are all reporting their sales tax through a POS system. So we have a lot of different strategies we can use, but it really comes down to, I think, two things. One is people, and you'll see we have processes, technology, and commitment to the development of tax policy. Strategy, I lump in between processes and technology. I think utilizing and leveraging technology is a strategy within our agency. I also think the processes that we have in place can drive efficiencies, and we work on doing that each and every day. The one thing that drives good technology and good processes is good people. And the fact is, the other piece of this is that not having enough staff, and I know you hear that a lot, but the fact is we are the one agency that gives you a net positive return when we hire somebody. There's a long runway to hiring somebody. It's about 18 months to get them to the point where they can probably really do a job and turn a profit. But if we took that one person through our ACT program, by 18 months, they're worth about $2 million a year an amount of return of money. So for $100,000 that we put out, you're getting back about $2 million per person. Our audit cover rates are low. They're low benchmarks of other states. In other words, we're not auditing enough people, businesses, and places the way we should, and that's driven absolutely by staffing. We just don't have enough people to go around. And we would return and give you a revenue lift if we were able to do that on a really consistent basis. The other thing I just want to mention before we go any further, Tiffany, is strategies. There are strategies that we've mentioned each and every year, at least since I've been here and even before I was here, because I picked them up off the desk from my predecessor, that could be implemented by the state that would give you a revenue lift. Sometimes they're painful though. So you have to kind of balance out the geopolitical politics of whether you want to do it or not. I'll give you one example. If you go to get your license renewed in California, they check to see if you owe any state taxes, much like they do on your property taxes. If you owe state taxes, you have to pay them before you can get your license. What they do is they give you a temporary driving permit because they want you to be able to get to work, but it's not your regular license until you get clear on the state taxes that you owe. The first year California did that, they raised almost $1 billion in unpaid taxes. Now, Connecticut's not California. We're significantly less. Could we get 50 million out of it? 100 million out of it? Absolutely. In other states, they're allowed to hire lawyers outside of the state to do outside state collections. So let's say you owe us and then you bail and you head off to Florida. You go to Florida, but you owed us $50,000. We have to go to the AG's office, who are wonderful, cooperative, great people. We love them, and share with them that we want to take some enforcement action here. And then they have to find an attorney who's conversant in collection and tax policy and our system to be able to go out and figure out how to collect that money from the person who absconded out to Florida. It's laborious, it's difficult, and AG's office has a ton of other issues that are competing for attention here. So what other states do? They go out and hire outside attorneys outside the state that they can lean to if they have to on a per diem basis or a project basis and have them actually do the collection effort for them. Simple, would give you a lot of revenue lift, something that we've asked for every year. And then finally, as elected officials, I just want to say, as we work to chip away at the tax gap, you're going to get calls. And there's nothing wrong. You're doing your due diligence. But if you're representing a constituent and calling me and saying, hey, look, Joey says he owes, the sales tax, but he thinks he paid it already. We will look into it. We will see what we can find out. But there's pain there for you, right? There's pain of us going, now we should collect that money. Don't get me wrong. Joey should pay us. But sometimes if we take a more aggressive posture, it can be difficult. So these are some of the things that you have to consider when we implement new strategies and new policies in doing this. However, I can definitely tell you, we do not have enough people when you benchmark us against other states that are out there, and it costs us money to do that. Here's just a breakdown of our staffing levels. And it's a little bit is, you'll see in 2012, we had agency-wide 734 employees. And by 2025, we have 593 employees. Now, you can see it's a downward, in the audit division in particular, it's a downward curve, but we are leveraging technology, software to do some of this work. So for example, we don't have a mailroom really anymore that sits there and opens up pieces of mail because few are filing on mail now, but that is reflected in there. So you're going to see a natural lowering of our headcount. However, the big number there would be in the auditing division, which hurts us and hurts our revenue collections. Part of the recommendation of this report is that we hire additional staff, we reallocate some resources. Some people have suggested that we move staff around, take some people out of, let's say, sales tax and move them over auditing, figuring that they'll give you a bigger lift there. And the problem with that, I always liken to it from my mayor days. You can't take a fireman and move them over to the police station. You can't take a police officer and move them over to the fire station. And if you do that, you're not going to get good productivity, but more importantly, their previous job is going to suffer. So I could take the sales tax person and move them over to auditing, but then your sales tax revenues are going to be hurting, or you're going to see a drop there. That doesn't really, it's a zero-sum game. You're just moving people around and not being able to get the revenue lift that you need to be able to pay the bills here and do the programs you want to do. So this is a critical issue for us. This year, we've been on a freeze essentially it's a freeze since prior to Christmas. So we've done a few positions, but we really haven't been able even to do promotions in some cases. And again, it's hurting us in our ability to collect taxes. Post-filing process and technologies. I'm gonna let John walk you through this page just because I'm sure you're tired of hearing it.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. The post-filing coupons, this is really just something that we do and it's embedded in our normal process. So in an attempt to get at those taxpayers that have filed and haven't paid, we contact them. And that's part of what Commissioner was talking about earlier is we attempt to make as much contact as we can. We send them billing notices. We send them notification that you filed a return and you have this outstanding balance due. Our noticing, I think the reason why it's here and that we wanted to raise the point here is that it's effective. When somebody files a return and they don't pay what they owe, and I'm talking about personal income tax, typically a notice from the agency is what's needed to get that person to pay what's due. Doesn't happen in all cases, but in most cases, we are able to recover what's due through post-filing coupons. The other item on the screen is our modernized tax administration system. We've been here talking about this for the last couple of years. We call it CTAX internally at the agency, but this is part of the larger system that drives these notices, that drives all of our tax administration processes. It really is state of the art. It's used in over 30 states across the country. It allows us to manage taxpayers' accounts, case management in terms of enforcement action. It really is, Connecticut should be proud that we've got a real state-of-the-art system to manage our tax revenue.
I just want to thank Phil Soucy for the work he did. He's here with us today and he's done a phenomenal job, serves as a de facto operations direction for our agency. And we're just really lucky to have Phil. Commitment to develop a tax policy. I think part of the discussion that you have here in finance is just that, right? Along with the governor's office, Office of Policy Management, trying to give us some benchmark information, whether it's a tax incident study or this study, to be able to make future decisions about where you want to drive tax policy, who it impacts, why you decided to do it this way. For too long, we've been flying in the dark, I think, over the last 40 years or so. And this is a huge step. One of the core principles, certainly, of our agency that I brought on is the commitment to transparency and working with people to give you the information you need, the governor the information he needs, and of course, our taxpayers the information that they need. So that was kind of a race through. July 1st, we'll be posting recommendations or steps that we're taking to try to address some of this stuff. Some of them are out of our hands. Will be subject to discussions relating to budgeting and things like that. Other things are things that we can do internally, and we'll post those up and folks will be able to comment on that. We will make a commitment to notifying the chair and the ranking members prior to posting that up so you know exactly how we're addressing some of the things that are brought out in this report.
Thank you again, Commissioner and crew. I will note that I feel very grateful to be working with all of you. You are very responsive, at least, to requests that we have made for information. And I really appreciate your approach to this. So before I ask, I'm going to start off with a couple questions, but I will observe this committee's custom of limiting ourselves to 2 questions initially. If you, like me, have more than 2 questions, don't fear, we will get back to you, but I want to give everybody a chance to ask a couple first up front. So I guess my first question I want to focus on one of the big questions here, which of course is hiring and staffing. And I want to note particularly something that you, Commissioner, said about, not moving people around, which to me also highlights that this is not just about the enforcement of going after people who owe taxes. This is about the fairness, the perceived fairness of our system. And it's about respect for those who do pay their taxes in full. It's hard for those people who go through a lot of hoops, and believe me, I know firsthand that our tax code is very complicated, who do what is asked of them without being enforced. And it is out of respect for them, in addition to the additional revenue it will produce, that we are having this conversation about making sure that everybody's, following the same set of rules. So that said, clearly you have need for additional staffing, and you yourself have said it is demonstrable that additional staffing produces a net positive return. And I wonder whether you are comfortable quantifying the kind of staffing, particularly audit staffing, that might put us on par with those national averages, the 3% audit.
Yeah, we asked for, in addition to our current table of organization, additional 50 auditors, which we would not be able to hire 50 auditors in 1 year. It would take a period of time to do that. So I think we brought it down to about 30, which we thought we could reasonably do in a year's time, right? You're not going to pay, we asked for 50% salary of them because you can't hire everybody at once. So by the time you get through the interviews and the background checks and things like that, months go by, and we thought that was a good number. Unfortunately, this is a very tight budget year. We've got fiscal guardrails that I think all of us are committed to. That wasn't able to be provided to us. But I think a significant dent, to answer your question, would be about 30 dispersed throughout that particular area. And John has had auditing, that's why I'm looking at him. So if you want to add into that, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. And Representative, what I've done is, and again, I think Commissioner and I have talked about, a reasonable approach to this between 30 and 50. My numbers that I'm going to give you are a little higher because I'm trying to get to those benchmarks that you talked about that are in other tax administration agencies across the country. But what I did is I broke it down by tax type. Okay. So and we're always looking at the audit coverage rate. In other words, out of the entire population of taxpayers, what's the percentage that we're auditing? All right. So for personal income tax, to give you an idea, we're auditing about 0.4% of all taxpayers. Okay. So it's low. When you look at other states and even other countries, they're auditing about 3% of taxpayers. The IRS is just like us. They're about 0.5%, and they're trying to move up to that 1% benchmark. So to give you an idea, if we were to move up to that 1% benchmark like the IRS is, we would need an additional 50 personal income tax auditors. All right, they'd be able to do another 10,000 cases per year. And each auditor, roughly, like Commissioner said, brings in $2 million per year. Could be higher in some cases, depends on the issues, but on average, it's about $2 million per year. If you look at sales tax, that is an area that we are extremely deficient in. We have about 50 sales tax auditors right now to cover about 217,000 registered taxpayers in Connecticut. And sales tax is a trust fund tax. Customer goes to the store, pays their tax on the good that they're purchasing or the service that they're purchasing. And the state relies on that, as you all know, relies on that retailer to turn it over to the state. Like I said, 50 sales tax auditors to cover that large of a population. So right now we do about 0.68%. So we're still under 1%. In order to get us to that 1% benchmark, we would need about 25 more sales tax auditors to do that. And again, at $2 million per year, you could do the math. To combine the two, the 75 auditors would be about $150 million in additional revenue. Now, there are some things to also consider. If we bring in 75 auditors to the agency, then we need some collectors and we need some appellate officers. There's some support. I'll call it support, not the right terminology, but I'll call it support for those additional work that's occurring in the agency. Correct.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have many other questions and conversation about that. Sort of related to that, my second question is about, I just want to foreground some of the proposals that you've made about giving you the ability to collect out-of-state debt by hiring people to do it. The revocation of driver's licenses or providing of some temporary license until someone, and I believe, I don't know whether you mentioned your presentation, but limiting a business's ability to contract with the state if they have significant outstanding tax liability. find those interesting. I have put them on a list. Is that something, are those proposals something that you are, if we were to consider them, in a position to enact with the staffing that you currently have?
I'd have to look at how the final proposals were crafted. But some, for example, the clearance letters, let's say if we said any business with a contract more than $1 million doing business with the state of Connecticut has to get a clearance letter from us, we could do that. We do that all day long. That's easy. And by the way, it only makes sense, right? Why are we contracting with somebody out there who owes us money? It's kind of silly. The driver's license one would be a little bit more work with DMV. I'd probably figure out a 2-year rollout for that. But just, you know, as I mentioned, California, Massachusetts does this, and New York State does as well. And Maine as well. Yeah. So there are models out there that we could adopt and easily do them. So, and then the one about the attorneys, again, this is not in any way, disparaging of the AG's office. They really are good to us. So I got nothing but good things to say. It's just, they don't have the manpower. So let me go out and hire some folks that are experts in this in other states, not collectors or collection agencies. These are attorneys, because these things are very complicated. And we can give you a revenue lift there as well.
Thank you. I will pass the baton to the ranking member, Rep.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. And Commissioner Bowden, good morning. I do like the Deputy Commissioner a little bit better, and it's not because of anything personal, but it's because of where he lives. And I say that every year. So getting right into it, I know that there's a number of questions, so I will be brief. On page 5, I noticed that the tax gap estimates, and I noticed that your rate was at DRS rate was at 87.6%, compared to the IRS rate, which was 87.1. That's pretty good, I would say. But there still is that gap to get us a little higher. So my question is, do you find that our state tax code may be a little bit confusing? And if so, could that be contributing to that rate at 87 and maybe not, say, 95?
Title 12 is the most confusing piece of section of the Connecticut General Statutes that you can ever find. But I have to tell you, recodification is a great activity, a great project for the General Assembly. It's fraught with all kinds of problems. I did this in Danbury, where I did a recodification of our city ordinances. I thought it would be easy, right? Let's just throw out the law that says you have to clean up after your horse on the street. You know, all this easy stuff. It's really complicated because you're renumbering the entire section. However, it needs to be done. And there are things that Lou and you could put a team together that could come up with that we don't even do anymore, that are still sitting in the statute, or it's not even an existing policy or practice. So yeah, it would give you a revenue lift too.
Thank you for that. And I guess so, you know, dare I say, is there anything that the General Assembly or this committee could contribute to getting that number up from, let's say, 87 and higher? So that way, because again, I agree with the governor. We want less taxes, more taxpayers. And we also want to see our collection rate higher because, again, we're using those funds for everyday needs here in the state of Connecticut. So we want to make it easier to collect the taxes for the average person and get that rate up. So if there's something we can do here to contribute to that, you know, I'm all ears and I'd like to participate.
Yeah, we've had some success. John has been out. I was just at a senior center walking them through a quick deck by 80 seniors, and just going over them fraud prevention that they can do, as well as how do you file your taxes. A lot of those folks are still driven by the paper returns, and we don't do those anymore. And we can, but we really try to encourage people to do it online. And so, you know, I had them pushing on computers and having a little fun with it. But they, those things are real. That outreach is really critical, and it does bring back ROI, a return on your investment, whether we do it at the fairs or also having dual language people in those positions as well has been very helpful. It's particularly new entrepreneurs, new Americans that have started businesses. They just don't know how to file all this stuff. One project I thought we had talked about internally, and I know the legislature has talked about this over the years, is having a simple landing page for a small business. So if you're a business that's under $500,000, you go to one page, Secretary of State's there, DRS is there. Anybody you need to get a permit from is right there. It goes right through and you don't have to weave your way through all the different pages that we have as a simple small business initiative. So there's some ways to do that, and John, I don't know if I want to add on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Commissioner. And Representative, that's a great question. And I think our report outlines the areas that we could work with all of you on to, the people part of it, our staffing levels, certainly that's foundational, right? The technology, we think we're in a pretty good place with that. The third or the fourth item on our list is policy, right? And we're the agency that administers the Title 12. So we'd certainly like to be part of those discussions, and we could point out the areas that are complex and where taxpayers do have difficulty, because that is a component of the tax gap. If it's hard to understand, it's hard to comply with. But I just want to also set some context that these numbers are estimates, right? Even the IRS will come out and tell you this is a complete estimate. There's a huge unknown here. The underreporting segment of this tax gap is really the unknown. We don't know what that is, right? We're guessing at it, not guessing. We're taking an educated guess, and we're estimating to the best of our ability as to what that would be. But we could move the needle up, certainly. It's not going to be a big jump. But I think if we take a strategic approach to each of the items that we've outlined in this report, we could make a difference, certainly.
Thank you. That concludes my questions. And I guess I'll just end with a very brief comment that, in talking about hiring more staff, it's well received. I think, maybe simplifying the return might also contribute to getting the number up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Paletta. I just going to pick up. This is a conversation that we had a little bit about Rep. Paletta's excellent question here. We've touched on it in the early stages of a task force on tax expenditures, to which, the point that we passed something that's incredibly complex for you to enforce, for taxpayers to understand, and ends up maybe not producing the revenue either. We ought to make sure that we're aware of that, and I look forward to doing that. Representative Paletta, sorry, you are not Representative Paletta, you are Representative Piscopo.
Close, Madam Chair. Thank you. Commissioner, welcome. It's good to see you there. And I just had a quick question. You mentioned that other states use private contractors. Is that something we could look into? Do you need a legislative action to help you do that, or is that a course of action we could take? I would love to see maybe a pool of a private concern, 10 auditors come in and take some of the burden off of your department.
Yeah, 12-35C doesn't allow us to go out and hire private attorneys to be able to do collection efforts. But I just want to be clear, that it's a common practice around the country with other states. So that when folks do take off to Florida, we can get what's rightfully due our taxpayers.
Thank you. And my other question's on amnesty. You mentioned in your report that it needs a good cost benefit look at cost benefit analysis. And I was wondering, does it work? Have you done that cost benefit analysis?
We did an amnesty back in 2021 or 22.
Yes, it carried into 22.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it went like gangbusters. I mean, I at that time told the Secretary of LPM I thought we would do about 75 million on it. We did 120. It was very popular. The danger is that people think there's amnesty every year. They won't pay. It gets a little tiring. I had a little sign that said, this is it, the absolute last possible time you can ever possibly pay. Knowing that in 3 years we'll be saying the same thing. But it might be something worth exploring, because it really does bring in people to come in and pay. I mean, some, not all of them are out there waiting. There are some, but not all of them. So it's, if there's a way we can craft this, it's very narrow for a certain kind of tax, maybe we might look at, or some ways like that. It would provide a revenue lift for you.
Great. Your suggestions would be welcome on that, to that end. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Haynes online. Representative Haynes, are you with us? We'll come back to you. Representative Barry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Oh. You want her to go?
Representative Haynes, are you ready to go?
I am.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and sorry, I was trying to find the button. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Great to see you, and thank you to you and all your staff for being here and providing the information that you do. You had mentioned in your presentation the bane of your existence, the healthcare providers and their tax payments. Is your enforcement or administrative functions not working well in regards to these? In your opinion, what's driving that underpayment in this tax category? And to what my good colleague Rep. Piscopo said, is there something legislative that we can do to help you do that?
Sure. It's generally most people pay that particular tax. So it's not really a widespread thing. I would say that, what's been readily reported in the press related to Prospect has resulted in 18 months of negotiations over that, trying to get those folks to pay. So that's why I say it's the bane of my existence. There are other reasons why I think some of the hospitals fall behind, or even some of the nursing homes. Some of it was coming post-COVID, coming out of the COVID end. We pretty much got everybody up to speed now, so it's actually going pretty well. It's just all of these organizations, these healthcare organizations, operate on very fine lines, and any movement at all in their bottom line, or what's owed or what's due, they're very sensitive to that. So it's a lot of phone calls and work. We get it done, but it's a lot of phone calls and work. So the last thing we can do is intercept their Medicaid payments, offset the, whatever they owe us by keeping their Medicaid payment. And we don't want to do that, because that's going to put the hospital or the nursing home out of business, right? And that's not good for anybody, because we're going to have patients on the street. So we have to think about patient care here too. And it's a very complicated conundrum sometimes for us, but thankfully, at this point, we're in fairly good shape with all of our nursing homes. And really our hospitals, it's very limited to just a few that you read about in the paper.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Barry, for real this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ironically, that was my question. But can you just explain a little bit about what the healthcare provider fees are and how they're calculated?
Sure. I'll give you, Lou Bakari's here, and he helped draft the agreement for the payment of these fees. So I'm going to turn it over to him for just a second, just to kind of give you a 50,000-foot level how we got here. I asked the same question 2 years ago, so it's a good question. And it's interesting. Yes. Fire away if you want.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. There's one chapter in Connecticut in Title 12, Chapter 211C, and it's comprised of 3 separate provider fees and taxes. One is the second hospital user fee, one pertains to nursing homes, and the other pertains to intermediate care facilities. And the state, as a result of the 2019 litigation that the commissioner referenced, the Connecticut Hospital Association and the 26 hospitals brought suit against the state, challenging the constitutionality of Connecticut's first hospital user fee. And it was roughly about a $4 billion lawsuit that was at issue. The hospitals essentially asked back for all of the provider taxes and fees that they paid. As a resolution of that settlement, the state adopted a second hospital user fee, which was signed by the governor and approved by the General Assembly. So that's the sort of context and background. The second hospital user fee, it's important to note, as a result of that agreement, there was a 7-year essentially deal that was struck, that was found itself codified in statute, that brought in how much the hospitals are to pay over that 7-year period. If memory served, it ranges from $890 million down to $820 million. The last year of that settlement begins the fiscal year starting 7/1 of 25 and runs through 6/30 of 26. And after that, all bets are off in terms of what it might look like. And the long story short with regard to the hospitals is that they pay a tax that's based on their inpatient user fee revenues and their outpatient revenues. And it's a highly complicated formula that has two different tax rates from 6% on inpatient to a scale that ran from 13% down to 11 on outpatient. It really makes the head hurt, but that's the general gist of how the hospitals, but there's a prescribed amount in statute that the hospitals pay, and it's paid based on the amount of their revenues percentage-wise are to the overall revenues during that period. So if you have 26 hospitals, you might have one that pays 20% of the revenue or comprises 20%. Its taxes, its fees would be based on that percentages. The the nursing home and the intermediate care facilities are essentially day fees, like a bed fee that you might have heard of. So the nursing homes pay a fee, a patient bed fee, a set fee. I think I'm in the area of $26 a day, something like that, times the number of beds, and that will equal their fee. And these fees and taxes are paid on a quarterly basis across the board. So now that I've thoroughly bored everyone and put you all to sleep, I hope that made sense.
It sort of does.
We're happy to, and anything we can do to elaborate or anything at all, please, this truly, there's a lot of information, the settlement agreement, the statutes, and anything that we can do to help fill in blanks, happy to. I know I threw a lot there and I totally recognize that.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I will do a little research on my own. Thank you.
Whatever
Thank
we-
you for the
I hope-
background.
I hope it helped.
Thank you. It did. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Those of us who were here then are having flashbacks to that, those headlines. Representative Carney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your very interesting presentation. I guess the question I have, since underreporting is the largest part of the discrepancy, and it's a difficult number to come up with, how do you actually figure out what the number you're using for underreporting, and how do you get there?
Thanks, Representative. It's, we're using audit statistics. So we've got a history of our audit statistics that, combined with some other data that's out there, particularly the IRS studies. It's kind of a hybrid approach that our team is taken. But it's primarily driven by our historical audit statistics.
I just want to add, so we do run into this a lot where we do an audit in the blind, and I don't think it's any great state secret. I mean, we generally figure about 30% of cash is not being reported, right? So small restaurant, they're only showing up with credit card transactions and there's no cash being deposited. We assume about 30%, unless they can prove otherwise, is going south and that is being underreported. One of the things we did do this year is we set up a small team of folks that concentrated a lot on predominantly cash businesses that we've seen out there based on some of the studies and the algorithms that we have. And we've set them out there and they've been meeting with business owners and it's been very successful. If I had 5 more of those, it'd be even more successful. We also have worked with municipalities, Stamford and Waterbury, where we've done joint work with their local zoning and health officials, as well as our tax folks, as well as state police. And we found a number of small vape shops, for example, selling marijuana, all kinds of different illegal products. None of them are paying taxes on it, of course. None of them are registered. None of them are have permits for it. And we made, in fact, Stamford made a significant amount of arrests. And of course, none of them got sales and use tax permits. So just like Al Capone.
So when you decide to do an audit, I guess based around an assumption that a particular business is underreporting, do you look at, because my thought is, okay, let's say I own a landscaping business and you see that and I'm putting down that I make $50,000 after expenses, which I mean is not unreasonable, I guess, but how deep of a dive would you do into that? I mean, I don't want to, let's say I store cash under my bed. How are you ever going to figure that out?
Oh, I can tell you, people store cash under the
Right.
bed. I mean, that's legit. There's a number of different ways we do this depending on the business, right? The program that we've just worked on all last year, we would physically go out and visit the restaurant. And it was sort of a touch to see what's happening. If they could provide documentation, we would sit down with the owner of the business and, you know, it would be a couple hours. Most times we were in and out of there. We didn't sense that there was anything underreporting going on. In other cases, like you mentioned, that would be a much deeper dive. And if they had employees and they weren't paying them on the books or paying or, you know, keeping the withholding tax and submitting it like they're supposed to, that would also require us to notify other agencies as well that that's going on. So it just depends on the business that's out there, but there's a lot of deep diving that we do, and we see a lot of things that are out there. And I think I said this before. I mean, it's amazing what people put on Facebook. And, you know, you don't even have to leave your chair to be able to figure out what some of these folks are up to.
So I think that's my 2 questions. So thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner.
And come back to you later if you want. Representative Farrar.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm excited, of course, which feels a weird word to use in the Finance Committee, but I am excited to see you all and to talk about this report. I know we worked closely together to work on this language in statute to produce this first report, and I really appreciate the collaboration on that. I did just want to first off start coming back to a little bit where the Chairwoman's first questions were going. I think a bit on the return on investment that we can see by investing in more auditors. And from the calculations you all shared, just by using my own calculator, it seems that if we invest $5 million in additional staff, we would receive $100 million in unpaid taxes. And I just wanted to kind of ask more specifically, when looking at kind of across the board, you know, where taxes are being unpaid, where would you kind of focus your efforts more, you know, and how would you prioritize if we are successful at getting some of those additional staff for your department?
I think sales and use tax is probably close to the #1 area that we see under reporting going on. And we certainly deploy a significant amount of people to that. And John, you want anything else on the TIT or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. And Representative, it was great to work with you on the report as well. I think Commissioner's absolutely right. Sales and use tax, it's a trust fund tax, right? Like as we talked about. So clearly, we've got some challenges there. So that would be a priority. Personal income tax, there's roughly 1.7 to 2 million taxpayers. So there's an awful lot of room for improvement on the enforcement side there as well. So those would be the 2 primary areas that I would say. The General Assembly did some great things back in 2016 with corporation business tax, and took away a lot of the big issues that were present at that time. So although we still have a staff that's dedicated to corporation business tax, I don't think it's as big of a problem as it was, you know, several years ago. So I would say personal income tax, sales tax, and along with personal income tax would be employer withholding. Those are the areas that I think, right? Would you agree? Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And then because we did put together this language together, I was looking at the language in statute, and we had particularly requested the income distribution and population distribution. And I noticed in the report that we have those for non-filing and underpayment, but not for the biggest tranche of underreporting. And I know, Commissioner, you kind of hypothesized, you know, a range of scenarios that might be happening underreporting, but unless we look more closely at the population and the income distribution, it kind of leaves us at a loss. So I was wondering for the department, you know, is that something you all are able to do as a next step? Are there other resources or information you need to provide that?
So Representative, this is something that we had a lot of discussion about internally, and we realized that That part of the report only deals with those two segments of the tax gap. The underreporting is the most difficult area for us. It's challenging. And we actually, our team, Mike Gallagher and his analytics team, we spoke with the IRS on it. And they were scratching their head as to how we would accomplish that, to be quite honest with you. So we're still looking at that. We're hopeful that we could employ some strategies in future reports that would allow us to get a good look into that part of the tax gap. There are some studies out there, some scholarly studies that I think we may be able to rely on, but we're just not there yet. We apologize for that, that deficiency in the report, but we just didn't have the ability to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to follow up more, especially about what the IRS has shared, since the IRS does do this in their reporting, and I welcome that conversation. So thank you all, and thank you to the chair.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you again for your work ensuring that this report existed in the first place. Representative Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I saw the comparison of us versus DRS versus the IRS at 87%. I think it's 87 and 87.6. What is the difference between other states? Do we know the low end and the high end, where we fit there?
As far as auditing goes and
Correct.
benchmarking auditing, 3% is the average. We'll just say would be an example of a state that's really over.
Representative, are you asking about the audit coverage rate? How as a population, how many taxpayers are being audited? Or are you asking about the
No.
compliance or
Compliance.
the compliance?
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep, no, thank you. There's not many states that have done this, to be quite honest with you. I think the last study we were able to find, I believe, was the state of Idaho that did it in 2009, I believe, is the last one that's been done. So thank you. We're a leader in this right now as a result of this. But so I can't really say for sure if we're close to what the other states were. I believe the methodology that Idaho used in that study was purely just to take the federal statistics and apply it to their situation, to their state's revenue. So yes, then if you want to look at it that way, we're similar. But I think what's interesting here, the similarities between Connecticut and IRS are striking. The non-compliance rate is all about the same, 15%. Compliance rate is about 85 to 87%. The largest segment of underreporters of the tax gap is underreporters, about 80% for us, 80% for the IRS. The workforce decline, 20 to 25%. Same thing for Connecticut. Audit coverage rates, we're approximately for income tax about 0.5%. The IRS is 0.5%. And then the enforcement budgets have been cut by like 25%. We're in the same situation. So it's striking as we were going through this, how similar the state of Connecticut is in this respect to what the IRS is. You can really draw some comparisons.
And then the second question is, noticing with the income deciles, there is a focus between, I think, the earners of 100,000 to 300,000. Is that something that is predetermined? How does that number end up manifesting in terms of who gets focused on? And is there a way to change our focus onto the upper income earners where there is a higher likelihood of actual returns to the state?
So good question. I had a feeling you were going to ask about that. There's a couple of factors there. First, there's more of those taxpayers that fall into that range. So off the bat, we're looking at those taxpayers. They take less time to do, to be quite honest with you. They're not as complex. Typically the higher income taxpayers are more complex. They take our auditors more time. They yield more. Yes, they yield significantly more in terms of dollars for the state, but they take far more time to complete. And then lastly, there are certain issues that we have to address with a return, regardless of the taxpayer's income level. So I think all those things factor into it. We don't specifically focus just on that segment that you talk about. There are some things that require us to look at, those types of returns.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Veach, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. This is a great report. I guess I'll place it on my dining room table. In any event, most of my questions have been answered, but I do have, and I'm not sure how we address this. What type of penalties in terms of percentages? There must be some sort of interest or fees that is being assessed to particularly corporate and an individual, since we can identify those people, even though the huge amount that's unidentifiable, in my opinion, which I would be tackling that clearly. There's a lot of money there. Can somebody answer that? And it's probably in this report, but
Yeah, no, there's significant penalties and interest that are charged and
20%,
depends
is it
on the
flat
tax
fee?
type.
I mean,
Representative, I thought.
individual and business.
Okay,
It-
so we could, I guess I can address this question two ways.
Okay.
There's the civil side,
Mhm.
okay? And typically, those penalties for negligence, it's 10% of the amount that's due. And there's interest that's also calculated on any liability. That's calculated at 1% per month or fraction of a month. That's your typical penalty, right? There's also increased penalties for fraud or intent to evade. Those penalties are usually 25% of what's due, along with the interest of 1%, like I said. The only kind of caveat to that is or straying away from those general rules is with sales tax. I believe the penalty on sales tax for negligence is 15% and not the typical 10. Yeah, all right, but
Okay.
that should give you a pretty baseline of how the penalties and interest work.
The problem being just you have to collect that.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
can apply for a waiver if there's extenuating circumstances as to why your return on sales tax, for example, wasn't submitted. There's a whole process to be able to do that
Okay.
for penalties and the interest.
Thank you for your answers, sir. He's shaking his head. Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative, Vice Chair, Representative Rader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you being here and walking us through this report. It's been really enlightening and informative. I have a question around your first recommendation around people and staffing, and just looking at kind of historically the number of positions that you all have had in terms of auditors. And it looks like we kind of held steady in the last decade, but there was a drastic decrease between 23 and 24 of 43 auditors. And then it looks like we've captured back about 14. So would love to understand, was that a budgetary reason? Was it an inability to hire auditors? And that was my bigger question is, if we were to wave a magic wand and give you all the auditors you asked for, is the workforce there to fill those positions to a level that you feel would properly serve to what, Representative Farrar and others have said to really ramp up that enforcement and going after those underpayments?
Yeah, the reason you saw the drop was the retirement wave that hit where people left. Ironically and interestingly enough, a lot of people left after the deadline, which we did, like, we sort of understood where we're going to be when we hit that date, but then a lot of people waited till the fall to let us know. And that hurt. And it's still hurting today. We've lost some great people, very happy that they're on the beach with a margarita, but for the rest of us, it hurts the agency as we try to backfill those positions. So that's been probably the biggest thing you see in here. Now, in terms of, we have worked and Commissioner Gilman has worked very hard at reducing the amount of time it takes us to onboard an employee at the state of Connecticut, right? When we did the Boston Consulting Group study several years ago, it was 33 weeks. 33 weeks from the time you talk to somebody to the time they walk in the door before they start training, to get them on board. We've cut that, and we've developed some statewide, some shortcuts that are available. And by shortcuts, I don't mean you're cutting on quality or anything like that. It just means it goes from 33 weeks to maybe 20 weeks, right? So, but that's a long time to ask somebody to wait for a job. So we think, and John and I have talked about this all the time, that we really need to have some process to allow us still meet all the union rules and regulations, all the state civil service regulations, but be able to hire people a lot quicker, because we got an 18-month runway on that person before they can really start bringing back the revenue that we'd like them to bring back. Is the talent out there? That's, John's very active at Post University. I've been doing some work with Western Connecticut State University, trying to get people interested in this kind of career field for young people. Our best batch of new employees so far has been those that have re-entered the workforce, middle age, for lack of a better term, folks, 40s and 50s. They've been phenomenal. And excited to have a job. They love being here and they work. So it would take us time to really backfill all those positions. It would take us time to fill all the new positions, let alone backfill the positions that we're missing. So that's why we didn't ask for 100 new auditors, because that would be silly. We'd never be able to fill them. Could we do 30 the first year out? Sure.
And you have the training capacity to do that, to bring those folks in.
That's one thing we do well. Everybody, my favorite piece of the training, and I don't want to digress here, but is everybody has to spend some time in the call center. You know, our call center is right on Columbus Avenue. John and I go there in a month or two. We spend a couple hours taking calls ourselves to sort of show the employees that if we're going to ask you to do it, we're willing to do it as well. But more importantly, it's an amazing process. And when a new employee comes in and says, wow, I know everything there is to know now. They really don't, but it's great to see their enthusiasm and excitement.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Yakarino.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for being here late. So I have a question for the commissioners. I was at Alexion this morning with the BioCT. The governor was there. And shockingly, they brought up the tax code in Connecticut, and sometimes they have a hard time understanding it or interpreting and that. Do you work with any of those companies? Because they do it. It's very complex for certain tax credits or certain tax credits, basically, to help them out understanding, because even with their lawyers and their tax folks, they have a hard time understanding that.
Yeah, we work very closely with DECD on implementation of those tax credits that you all passed. Some of them, as mentioned earlier in the meeting, the language is not clear as to how to interpret it. We're blessed to have some great lawyers that have been here a long time, 30+ years, to understand the legislative history related to a particular tax credit, to understand how to apply it, where to apply it, and what's the paperwork you need ahead of time. It's a lot to walk somebody through. And certainly something that could, as we talked about earlier, would be open to streamlining for folks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you all. I apologize for being here late.
Representative, if I could just add, one of the things that we hear the most often from taxpayers, as the one you just visited, is they want certainty, right? They want to grow their business in Connecticut. They want to be able to hire more employees and to grow. They need to have certainty when it comes to tax policy. That's the number one thing that we hear all the time.
And that's what we heard this morning, and I think it's important. And also something that we keep pushing off is the capital stock tax. It's a minimal tax, but it really hurts their industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Constantine, Vice Chair Constantine.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Hey, thank you so much for explaining your desire for staffing levels, whether it's 30, 50, or ideally 75. I noticed deep down on page 22 and 27, you get to predictive modeling and AI. Could you explain what you have currently in place right now, and what would be your wish tech budget, either current or in the future?
All right, thank you, Representative. I'll talk about predictive modeling first. And this is something that we've used in our collections area in the past, and it was extremely successful. We've recently transitioned to a new tax administration system and haven't gotten our predictive modeling capabilities up and running yet. But the plan is to have something in place like we had prior to our conversion. What it did was it allowed our collection staff to focus on the accounts that needed the attention, those taxpayers that did not have the propensity to pay what was due. And we tested that model. And we were within 99% of an accuracy rate, which was extremely, extremely good when compared to others around the country. So the plan is to roll that out in our new system as well. As far as AI goes, this is something we hear all the time. We hear it constantly, especially from peers in other tax departments. Everybody wants to know what we're all doing with AI. It's so new. We're exploring it. Matter of fact, we had a conversation, Commissioner and I had a conversation with our IT manager from BITS, and they're exploring AI, how it could be used in tax administration. There are no tax administrators out there in the country that are using AI right now. Everyone's exploring it. Everyone wants to see how it could be beneficial. There's also a statewide policy regarding the use of AI through OPM. So we're mindful of that, and anything that we would like to propose, we're certainly going to go through that committee as well.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Menefee had his hand up. Are you there?
Yes, sorry, I am here. Can you hear me?
Have a question?
Yes. All right. I had just wanted to know if we had an estimated dollar amount of the tax gap owed by out-of-state individuals and businesses, and if there was any way to see about if there was any kind of state gap for potential people doing this internationally.
Yeah. So this number is a little bit old, but on the income tax, it's around $140 million that's owed from out of state. Internationally, I don't know. We wouldn't probably. I don't think we'd have a good number, a good handle on that. I don't want to put something out there that's not accurate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Wilson.
Thank you guys again for being here. I want to go back to focus on some of your priorities and recommendations in your report from the strategic part where we talk about hiring, reallocating resources and things of that sort. And, you know, knowing not everything can kind of be done all at once, in what order would you prioritize many of those recommendations?
Yeah, so I want to be clear about the hiring thing. We didn't do this report with the intention of whining about not having enough people. Every agency out there, worthwhile, hardworking, and I don't want to be perceived that way. It's one of the few agencies though where you do hire somebody and there's a return on the money that you spend. So it's probably one of the best decisions you can do in terms of being able to fund the rest of the state government and the services that we all want to provide. I think things on the systems would probably be the easiest priority, the low-hanging fruit, if you will. Hiring, as I mentioned earlier, has a little bit longer runway, but it's something that's desperately needed. And yeah, education outreach that we do also is, first of all, it's very popular with our taxpayers, but also has borne fruit at bringing in more returns. And oftentimes it's a benefit to them. We owe them money. And sometimes one of the things interestingly we found is when you did the child tax credit, we were mailing checks, is the mobility that some people have. People kept saying to me, "You got $15 million left in that account." I go, "Yeah, because some of these folks are moving 4, 5, 6, 7 times in 18 months. Then that's a reflection of our housing crisis." So that to me has been incredibly interesting. And that just tells me that there are more folks out there that if they filed, we would probably maybe a very modest return, but give them a return. At least we owe them money.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Paolillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see everybody. And I always just want to thank you for your collaborative effort when we reach out with constituent concerns and working on other policy issues. The agency is always very responsive. A question with crossover with other agency audits, possibly, say, Department of Labor. I know we've talked a lot about staffing today, but what's the synergy there? Say if DOL is in a small business, for instance, and it may be a non-filer or someone underreporting or some of the categories that you kind of laid out today. How does that referral basis work, and how do those relationships work where there may be other commissioners or other agencies doing that audit work, that maybe hasn't arrived at DRS yet?
You know, eliminating silos are always the biggest challenge in a large organization like the state of Connecticut. So we do notify other agencies when we make a determination through auditing or any other kind of enforcement action that we have out there. We also have worked closely with DMV on the highway use fee during safety inspections to understand who's not registering their vehicles for that, their trucks for that. So we do partner a lot of times, sometimes on an informal basis. I mentioned earlier some of the sweeps and enforcement sweeps we've been doing with state police, but also on a more formalized basis when you have a very sort of audit going on and we find out somebody's not paying their withholding tax. And we then go through a whole process of notifying each other. Lou, I don't know if you want to pipe in on that at all in terms of.
The only thing I think it's a great question. I think the state faces it all the time. This is sort of my opinion of it. I think that there's a lack of integration. I think that the state is absolutely inefficient in how it operates. It's just the reality of it, right? So I think we try to do the best we can within the parameters that we can operate. There's only so much that we can do. As an agency, we're constricted by confidentiality. So we just can't go out to other agencies and do things, right? We have restriction of our data. It's confidential, but I think we try, both the commissioner and John referenced earlier, I think we try on a small scale. I know John and his folks in audit work a lot with the Department of Labor for misclassification of folks and things like that. So there is there. I know from the criminal folks that I oversee, we do try, we do joint efforts with DMV Labor, DEMIS. We try to go out there and things, whether it's even on a small term basis, whether it's tobacco products or cigarettes or things like that. So there are things out there like that, but I think without sort of a mandate or some sort of direction, I think we're all sort of trying to operate the best we can do and do the best we can. But I think it really is sort of a place that sort of screams the state could be a whole lot more efficient and effective if there was a little more direction.
I think if I could just add on to that, I think it happens because commissioners are professional and they contact each other. Could there be a more formalized, efficient way to do that? No question about it. I think even on the, I was recently doing some work on the paid medical leave program, which is an area that we certainly should be interfacing with. And our software won't talk to their software. Now they're a relatively new organization. They just bought their software a couple of years ago. And I think I just gotten there. I think we had talked to them and met with them and said, you should get on the same software we're on so that our systems can talk to each other and interlink and be able to notify when we see situations like that. And they went with a different vendor. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff, the technology stuff is an issue. And you asked, so I'm going to mention this. Not always, but most agencies have a different set of paperwork even. So if I want to request to buy a stapler, that's called one form in DRS and something completely different in another agency. So you literally have to learn the forms in different agencies depending on what procurement rules are in place and things like that. So it can be frustrating. I'm sorry. But yes, so.
Please continue. We're very interested in this topic.
I was going to say this. This is a funny story. We have a form called the ADM-3, which is a procurement form. And I asked our business folks in our office, they said, well, is there an ADM-4? And they said, no. I said, is there an ADM-2? No. What does ADM stand for? We don't know. It's just always been that way. So a lot of that goes on.
Thank you. Thank you for the honesty there and the transparency with the question and the answer. A follow-up, you mentioned and had a couple follow-ups, but I'll just ask this one. In terms of, as you see audit rate, as you mentioned, a couple different benchmarks, 1%, 2%, 3%. Do you see a correlation or do you have modeling either based upon past experience when you may have had higher audit rates with a more significant compliance rate? So as you hit 1%, 1.5, another 50 basis points, are there compliance rate scheduling models that you have that you can kind of like just lay out for us or just look at overall for increased compliance? Thank you.
That's a great question. And I can say that we haven't really measured it in the past. This is really the first time we're looking at a comprehensive tax gap report. So I can't really say, but anecdotally, what I could say is when we did have, I've been fortunate enough to have been at the agency for a long time, and I remember the days when we had over 300 auditors. Believe we had 320 or so auditors, and at that time we were doing a tremendous amount of audits themselves, and that translated to increased dollars. So I guess anecdotally you can say that yes, the compliance rate improved because we were collecting more money. That's really all I can say as far as that goes, because we just haven't measured until now, we haven't measured it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions and noting that we're a little bit past our time limit, I do have one quick follow-up, which is you mentioned the new tax administration system. You've mentioned a couple times earlier on in the report. You talk about how it sort of sets you back a little bit because you had to implement it. I just wonder whether that is completely up to speed now and it's now helping you.
All of our rollouts have been completed, and they have since turned the system over essentially to us, although they still provide support when we need it. It was a wise investment by this committee and the state of Connecticut. And I know I didn't mention earlier, but Rep. Farrar, I want to thank you for this report because you have been passionate, dedicated, and just really pumped up about it. So thanks for working on it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Fonfara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner, and to your very esteemed team that you bring here every year. It's great to see them as well. And as was said, we enjoy working with you and your team and how responsive you are to us as best you can be. A couple of things. One is on the sales tax. Let me start with your, as Representative Paolillo indicated, your candor, probably more so than most of us would be sitting in your seat, but we appreciate it. There's three letters that come to mind when you were speaking about one computer system not talking to another, or a form being one way in your department versus another. OPM, that's their job. That's what they should be doing, is coordinating between departments so that we're more efficient. Maybe we ought to examine how efficient OPM is. If you dare to comment, you can.
No, look, I would say, having been a member of this body many years ago, there's always a natural tension and push and pull with OPM, with the legislature, and also with individual agencies. It's just natural because of the different issues that each group is dealing with. Having said that, I would say that this current iteration of OPM, I think, has worked very hard to try to maximize efficiencies in a very inefficient, as Lou mentioned, world. And I think that's literally something that's under examination every day. Now, something like forms, it's a fun little example of how we do things around here, but a lot of that work has been taken over by DAS, and Commissioner Gilman has, over the last year and a half, I think, done a phenomenal job at addressing stuff like this. And it's when you have the amount of, tens of thousands of employees and dozens and hundreds of agencies, it's a lot. So I feel optimistic about where we're going. I think that there are certain reasons why certain things are done a certain way over the years. Just sometimes makes you shrug. But having said all that, yeah, if you say I'm defending OPM, I am, because I think in general, this version has really tried to bring some efficiency. We've had also through DAS, the creation of BITS, and human resources has been centralized, as well as EEOC functions. So there's been a lot of centralization that's going on. That may even last back to the previous administration as they, set the way, and that this is where we should go. But it's, government's not business, and government is not, here to earn a profit. We just got to break even.
I choose to believe your first analysis rather than your second. But in any event, with respect to sales tax, unreported, underreported, do you ever think about the float that is being created and benefited, which is taxpayer dollars? When you go into a restaurant and you pay for your meal, you think that that sales tax is going to the state of Connecticut. Sometimes it doesn't. But more importantly for this question is when businesses use the float, and I've never seen more energy around by major corporations when we were trying to bifurcate the sales tax from the cost of the service or the product, the meal, whatever it was. In this case, it's retail and stores that millions and millions of dollars that are floated annually. And I don't know what that number is, but it can't be small for them to be so energized about opposing that effort.
Do I think about it? I do think about it. I'll let John address this a little bit too, Senator. This last 2 years, I've seen more instances of medium-sized and small businesses keeping their sales tax. And we catch up. We'll eventually catch up. And I'm not sure why that is, except that we're coming out of COVID, particularly in the restaurant industry, where folks just, that's the last thing they have is that money sitting in the account, and they use it to pay their bills or pay their vendor or whatever. So you feel bad for them, but it's stealing from the taxpayers. The larger corporations, how they invest in what they do with that period, I think they have to pay almost weekly in some cases, or
They would file
quarterly,
monthly. They'd
month,
file
or monthly,
Yeah,
right?
most of the larger retailers would file monthly, but I think, Senator, what it really comes down to with these larger ones where, they have the impact here with in terms of the size of the dollars is they're generally not the taxpayers that we have the issues with. As the commissioner said it earlier in the session, that they are generally compliant. All of the big box retailers, for example, they're paying, they're filing, they're paying. They're not the ones that we have the issues with. So I don't think the float is as important to them from a compliance standpoint. Don't get me wrong. I think they're making money on the state's money. If that's the way you're looking at it in terms of the term float, they are certainly doing that. But in terms of from a compliance perspective, that's not where we see the
My issue is not with compliance.
Okay.
It's as you suggest, they are making money off of the state's money, taxpayers' money.
Yep.
And when you compare the small restaurant owner who's struggling to make it and the temptation to hold sales tax dollars, which we've had people testify in this committee, one gentleman who went to jail because he held that money for so long, used it to keep his business running. That's a different scenario.
Yes.
Most of us probably have some sympathy, not that we don't want people to pay their taxes, but we have some sympathy for that person, not the major retail corporation that is making money, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly. And as I said, they were in my office and clearly strongly opposed to any effort to have the state receive its monies quicker.
Sure. And Senator, I would submit that, the filing payment and frequency is set in statute. It's typically, like, as Commissioner said, it's monthly for those larger retailers that have a significant liability. Then it drops to quarterly for those kind of that mid-range, anyone under, I think it's $4,000 in annual sales tax that's due. And then we even have an annual filing. So think about that, smaller retailer, where the real issues are with compliance. They get to hang on to that for over a year. So I would submit that and the department would certainly welcome that conversation where we can look at those filing frequencies and see if there was something
Well,
that
the-
we can do.
The proposal that was on the table at that time was instantaneous transfer of sales tax.
Yep, yep.
And frankly opposed by some members on the committee at the time. I'm going back some years now. But, which always confused me. Last, more of an observation. This whole conversation about the tax gap and compliance and whatnot, and we're sort of schizophrenic, at least I am, on this issue. You know, we see revenue that is not being captured, and particularly in a time when we need revenue, like we do now, it gets our attention. But at the same time, we talk about wanting Connecticut to be an attractive state for businesses to want it to locate and to expand. And we don't like hearing that we're a high tax state, that we're, you know, that we're not competitive in that regard. Sales tax we are, but not all taxes are we competitive. And I just wonder about, you know, what's our ultimate objective? The governor likes to say, not more taxes, more taxpayers. And I think there's some value to that. If we're growing our economy, which we don't talk about, we don't put a lot of effort, in my opinion. I know people would disagree with me. We don't put enough effort into growing the economy in Connecticut, which would mean that we have more, I think, hopefully taxpayers, and each of us and each business would have to pay less, making Connecticut more competitive. I know your job is to administer whatever we give you, but maybe you have an opinion being a former member of this body.
I think your last point was right. I mean, if you put water on the moon and you want me to collect it, I'm gonna go get it for you. Having said all that, I can't, you know, everybody represents a different set of constituencies, and I'm respectful of that. However, I think we all benefit when we have created an environment where the entrepreneurial spirit of what Connecticut has always been is able to rise up, and businesses are able to start, to stay open, to expand, and to really become leaders in their industries. I don't know if we see that as much as we used to see it in Connecticut. You know, I come from a city, as you know, Senator, that one of the largest chip manufacturers in the world started literally in somebody's garage. That kind of story is where I think government can help, and where we can all help create an environment where that spirit comes back to Connecticut. I mentioned the restaurants earlier. I'm worried. I see a lot of small to medium size. Those are family businesses. They all make a certain number. I can close my eyes and tell you how much they're doing at a particular spot based on people coming in and out. And I've seen more collapsing businesses over the last 18 months than ever before. Some of it's post-COVID, you know, people's habits have changed, but I think it's just a really tough environment for them. And so anything you can think of that would be able to help support them and grow their businesses is a good thing for all of us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I am told Representative Iacarino has a very quick question.
Very quick. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I run a small business. I pay my sales tax every month, and I pay a lot of sales tax every month. I don't want to float anybody's money. Most merchants, most retailers would rather not collect it, but we do it for the good of the state. We actually collect that money and we submit it. And if I'm late, I pay a fee or a penalty. So if the state could come up with a software system, and I said this probably 6 or 7 years ago with this proposal, where we don't have to do anything, we don't have to pay another fee than we have that we're already paying with our accountants or everything else. I'd love that. But the fact of the matter is, there's no software that could directly go to a Clover or any point of sale system to directly submit it to the state. I would prefer that. It's a pain in the butt for me to do whatever. I have to do it this week. I do it myself. And I'm not late. I always pay. It's quite a bit of money actually for small business. But it's a pain. So I'd prefer not to have the money in my bank account personally, but there's no other way to do it. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I don't believe that was a question, Representative, but
It's a statement because the
But
answer
okay.
is, there's really no other way to do it without a software program. Real logistic. You can't, right? Am I right or wrong? Thank you.
Thank
I think
you.
you're right. The businesses are so unique that there's so many different vagaries in each different business. It's really hard to do.
Okay, for real, no questions. Again, I thank you for your, I think someone said 6 months of work to create this report. Puts a lot of important information in front of this committee, and I hope to continue that conversation in the coming months. So thank you for being here and for staying well over our stated term for the meeting. Thank you. We are adjourned.